Alrighty then, I'm Max Clark. This is 20 Minutes Max. And I just want to riff on something that came up in an email today. And I responded to somebody and I said something that I don't want to say, it came across really curt and maybe a little mean, right? And the point that I was making was, as a service provider, the majority of service providers on the market, pick your industry within the IT space, but the majority of service providers are taking technology that's been created by somebody else. Somebody is, built a box, written software, done whatever. They're taking that tech and they're doing integration, they're providing service on top of it, and then they're packaging that up and selling it as a service to a customer. And this is all fine. This is multi-$100 billion industry. This is this is how things work. Now, in my position, somebody that has to evaluate both underlying technology platforms as well as the service providers delivering that technology platform to our clients, and when we give them advice, is understanding what the actual USP is for that service provider. And this fits into a couple different buckets for me. But, roughly speaking, if you're coming to market and you're trying to sell a hosted voice system, so you can call it hosted PBX, hosted voice, UCaaS, unified communications, whatever you're calling it nowadays. Gartner calls it UCaaS, so now everybody, we just call it UCaaS. So in the UCaaS space, if you're a company that has written your stack from scratch, and these are, the Ring Central, Vonage, 8x8, Zoom, WebEx, these companies, right? Then you control your stack and you control your R&D and you control your features and it's you. Now, if you are not that company and you are a service provider doing some sort of integrator work on top of that, and you're in the voice space, you are running, the majority of them are running BroadSoft. You could be running NetSapiens, you could be running 3CX, you could be running 2600 hertz. You could be running, maybe you built a platform from scratch yourself based on, Asterisk or one of the SIP Express router variants or FreeSwitch or, whatever tooling and packaging is out there to run. Now, so this is where things get interesting for me. If we're talking to, if we're working with a client to help them understand which UCaaS company they should use, and we're making this evaluation, this determination for them, when you have a whole, you have a ton of companies in the market that are taking a BroadSoft platform and then maybe changing the UI, maybe not, maybe putting some other skin on it, maybe not, but ultimately it's a BroadSoft platform that they're going out and they're selling to market. What is the value proposition? What is the USP that makes what they're doing with that BroadSoft platform better than somebody else's BroadSoft platform versus somebody that wrote their own platform themselves? And I've got some Legos in the background here from my boys, but understanding how those Legos plug into each other and how they work and where you're delivering value, what value you're trying to actually get to, that becomes that's how I want to put that. That's like painting a watercolor, right? Like it's no longer about everything's hard and fast. It becomes more of, judgment and soft skills and understanding what that actual service provider is giving or what the client actually needs and results. And these things fit lots of different stuff. Maybe it's like today, the client needs to be able to have local on-site support from the people that are actually running the platform. If you look at that, if we go back to our original list, Ring Central, 8x8, Vonage, Zoom, they are not equipped to do truck rolls. Google Voice is not going to give you the ability to call them up and say, I need somebody to come to my office and help me. Like, you're just not getting that out of that organization. So if you have that need, now it instantaneously puts you into a different bucket. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just different. And this becomes a nuance that gets lost in a lot of technology purchasing decisions. It's those nuances of understanding, what's actually driving the selection process that will never get expressed in an RFP by a committee writing the RFP because why would they and how would they know? So right now, cloud has, of course, been the popular buzzword in tech for many years now, is dominated by Amazon Web Service, by AWS, and you have Microsoft with Azure, and you've got Google with Google GCP, and then you've got Oracle, and you've got Akamai buying Linode, and you've got DigitalOcean, and you've got Vultr, and you've got, and OVH. There's lots of different companies in these spaces, and then there's really cool platforms, Vercel, Fly.io, the Heroku, models where they're building tooling and infrastructure on top of somebody else's platform, which is the infrastructure, and then they expose. Or you start talking about an example of the service providers again that are going out to and acquiring a platform that then they're running and taking to market to offer services to their customers with. Infrastructure as a service space, or know what people are branding like this private cloud idea. I mean, they're not all of a sudden branding. It's been branding for a while, but most of it's VMware vCloud. If you're in the market and you're talking, and by the way, this is not to say that VMware vCloud isn't a great platform. That's not the point here. The point is, if you're in the market and you're talking to somebody who is a service provider using VMware vCloud as their base infrastructure, what is the actual nuance that you need out of that company? What is their USP? What are they doing about VMware vCloud that's different that gives you an advantage versus all the other options in the market offering a VMware vCloud-based environment? And, in some cases, maybe that option is just that nuance or that advantage is just size and scale. How big are they? What is their footprint in their vCloud environment? How big is their private cloud? What footprint is it? What data centers are they in? How many nodes do they have running? What is their purchasing leverage with VMware? Which then gets passed down to you, because if their unit cost is just lower, their cost is just the services cost less. Do you need somebody where you can have on-site support or not? Do you need specific regions or not? Do you need specific overlays or not? Do you need a specific architecture or not? These are the things become not the is vCloud the right answer or not? It's what tweaks are being put onto vCloud that actually might make it interesting for you or not. Or are you looking for a service provider that is writing an orchestration layer that can still give you virtualization and give you this private cloud experience, but isn't carrying the cost of VMware vCloud or Nutanix HCI or these different HP GreenLake, and is doing something around Kubernetes native if you're containers, or Proxmox, or OpenCloud or CloudStack, or OpenStack or CloudStack, or, and by the way, you're gonna find service providers that are based on ONAP. Again, it's just a lot of these decisions that service providers are making either comes down to a financial position of what tooling that they want to run because they can get a financial advantage, or maybe it's a market advantage, or maybe it's just that they exclusivity. I mean, there's lots of different things, right? And this again becomes part of the thing that becomes so confusing, for somebody out there in the market buying this stuff. 25 years ago, I was working for a VAR, value-added reseller, right? So a computer consulting company, and we made money by selling hardware to companies and then selling time and professional services time. So, back then, if you were migrating off of a Novell network to Windows NT 4.0, you were buying the server equipment, you were buying the licensing, and you were buying an engineer like me to show up and actually, migrate that data, set up the new environment, make sure everything got copied over, that your network worked. The hard thing for VARs, and this is a really interesting challenge for service providers, because if you look at it in the VAR, and I'll use kind of VAR and service provider interchangeably because the concept and the issue is the same. When you are small, you can provide the highest level of individualized attention to your customer. You can do one-off things, and you're not, in order to scale. Scale becomes standardization. And these are when you see organizations that start narrowing onto a specific niche or vertical or industry or way of doing things. And, if you fit into that way of doing things, it's good for you. And if you don't fit into that way of doing things, that service provider is it's just not good for you. But now the service provider's unit economics, get better with scale. So if you're talking to, if you're in the market buying hardware, and let's just say you want to buy Cisco, because, you've decided to buy Cisco. If you're talking to two VARs and one VAR is selling, $10 to $20 million a year of Cisco, and the other VAR is selling $200 million a year in Cisco, guess who has better pricing leverage for you? Well, working with that $200 million VAR might be really complex and complicated and confusing and annoying and not personalized. But that becomes this challenge. That becomes this thing that you have to negotiate and deal with. Dealing with an aggregator who is providing fiber optic internet services in metro markets, an aggregator or reseller or wholesale. I mean, there's, the terminology, we'll just use aggregator. An aggregator is basically, a company that for the most part is buying underlying wholesale service from, another phone company or CLEC or or cable company, you could go to the phone company and you can buy that service, but you can't, get that cable and whatever it is, but you're going to deal with the service delivery from that phone company. And if you want, unified billing across different, across all your circuits, you want personalized attention, you want flexibility, you want customization, you want all these different things. This is the reason why, there's this tier of service providers that overlay on top of this underlying infrastructure. And everywhere you look at, you're going to see that. You're going to see underlying infrastructure and technology, and you can go straight to that source and you can go straight to that, whatever it is, and you can consume it directly, or you can go into another tier. Twilio. Twilio is a great example of that. Wrote a very easy to consume API for you to interact with the PSTN. So you can provision phone numbers, you can send SMS, you can look up LMP, you can figure out, details on the phone number, you can make and receive phone calls, you can do all these different things. I mean, and Twilio is expanding into contact center, and they're providing all the, WebRTC gateways, and they're doing all this different stuff, and they make it really easy for you to consume. Now, the thing with Twilio is Twilio is overlaying underlying infrastructure. So what are they overlaying? Well, they're overlaying the phone companies. If you want to make a phone call or send a text message to somebody who's on a AT&T or Verizon or T-Mobile cell phone user, you've got to talk to AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile. And in a lot of cases, the relationship, when you look at this globally, T-Mobile might be buying it through an intermediary and not actually going down to Twilio, might be buying it from an intermediary and not actually the underlying carrier. So the decision and the evaluation that you're making now in this case is, as you go up this stack, if we think about it from the bottom in terms of the actual infrastructure up to the top of the stack, every step that you go here and that you add, you're adding margin. So they have to make money in order to provide that service. And the more layers that you have in that stack, the more margin, the more incremental costs that you have as a consumer, as a consumer of these services that you have to pay. So the advantages of these things, especially when you're starting out, if you're pre-product market fit, if you're still small infrastructure, if you don't have infrastructure teams, if you're still trying to figure out, product model or business model or client model or customer acquisition, all these different things, you can move much faster. Move fast. Go find the things that make you able to move the fastest. There is an inflection point, and there is an inflection point where it makes sense for you to start working your way down the stack, right? And that's something that I get to do in most of the conversations that I have with my clients. Have they reached the point yet where it makes sense for them to go down a tier? They're currently consuming services in a certain way? Does it make sense for them to change how they're consuming the service? Does it make sense for them to go down the stack? Does it make sense for them to get closer to the metal? And where do they actually sit, and how does that fit into their actual business strategy? So to come full circle on this one, my email was response to this person reaching out and pushing their service, and really their encapsulation of something that they were purchasing, that they had purchased and they were operationalized and that they were reselling as a service provider. And my reaction, of course, was, it's like, I don't really want to talk about that unless you've got some really specific, unusual tweak that you've done to it. And I'd love to know what your unusual tweak is. But otherwise, I know what your footprint is. I know where you're operating service at. I know what your books are, what your financial health of your organization is. I know how big your organization is. Like, what are you doing that's different? Is there something that you're doing that's massively different that I should be aware of that I don't know? Or is this something else? And let's not spend time talking about that. Let's spend talking about, other things that make you unique as a service provider that actually could produce value that could really move the needle for somebody. And sometimes these things can be very subtle. Like if you have a client with 1,000 servers in a data center, right? And these machines are starting to hit end of life. Maybe they're 4 years old, 5 years old, and now this company is looking at how do they cycle through these things. They can recycle. They could replace, by going out to Dell and HP or whoever, Supermicro and Quanta or whatever, and purchasing new hardware and cycling hardware in. Or they can go to a bare metal provider that can take and assume their existing infrastructure and then start cycling out their equipment with new equipment that the bare metal provider owns and operates and manages. When you look at that thing, again, this kind of goes backwards. I just said, at some point it makes sense for the company to go down the stack. It makes sense for you to go down the stack and get closer to the infrastructure. But in other times it makes sense to go back up the stack. I use the phrase like appropriate premium a lot, where is there an appropriate premium? By eliminating operational headache and levering in a service provider to take over that operational headache, especially if that service provider has already scaled and staffed and created processes and operationalized that thing, there's value, in it for you to go out and bring on that service provider. And in the case of this one, this example, it's radically more efficient. It's crazy. It's 87% savings, not, for their Kubernetes environment, not to be in AWS and EKS, but to be on their own physical servers. So there's already such a huge delta for them to go from, being in AWS to being on their own data center and their colo. They can afford in their financials and in their cost to deliver their service, they can move up a stack. They can use outsource, but they can contract out. They can go to a different service provider. They can remove this operational burden that they currently have. They can pay that service provider margin for it. By the way, that service provider has volume and staffing, so in some cases that margin isn't as much as you think it is. It's actually very efficient for them to make this change, and they can focus on their business, and they can still have a huge delta, and a cost advantage for themselves over AWS. I'm having this same conversation a lot in the security space, where small service providers just cannot staff and maintain a security operations center. When you talk about a 24/7 shift, one person being available 24/7 is actually 7 people. You need 7 people on shift. So if you're out evaluating SOC or NOC services, let's just keep it with SOC. If you're evaluating SOC services and you say, like, how many security analysts do you have? And they come back and they say, oh, we have 2, we have 4, we have 7, we have 12, we have 20. Okay, that's interesting, right? You can't even staff 24/7 shift. People have, if an event happens at 2:00 in the morning, people's cell phones are ringing to wake up out of bed to go to a console to get to work for you. Is that the environment that you want to be involved in? Or do you want to deal with a SOC that's actually staffed 24/7? Do you want to deal with a service provider that maybe has a few hundred analysts? Now, again, trade-offs. You have to figure out if those trade-offs are appropriate for you or not. But that's, these are the gray lines that make this very interesting and why there isn't like a one-size-fits-all for everybody. I can talk to, 4 different companies and give them 4 different recommendations for the same basic, technology stack. But the personalization and that customization based on where they currently are, what their blueprint is, when we create the blueprint, what their journey is, where they're going, all these sorts of things all filter into this. And anyways, I'm going to start rambling here, so I'm going to stop rambling because I'm at the 20-minute mark. This stuff's confusing. It's hard. It's not easy. Pay attention. Understand what they're selling you, where they sit in the value chain. What makes them unique and special. How are you taking advantage of that? What's the advantage that you're gaining there? Are you gaining an advantage or not? It's just because somebody just met somebody at a party and now you're in a meeting. And that happens a lot. Is that where you want to be? I'm Max Clark. That's 20 Minutes Max.